Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it a minute so that folks can trickle in from the waiting room. All right. Welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is on policy updates on zoning reform and multifamily developments in commercial areas. Before we get started, I just want to quickly tell you about the Housing Alliance. We are a statewide coalition working to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable homes for all Pennsylvanians. Webinars are free for members, so become a member today. You can do that by visiting housingalliancepa.org/become a member or contact us at info@housingalliancepa.org for more information. Next slide, couple of logistics. This webinar will run approximately for half an hour, and that includes time for Q&A. We encourage you to leave questions to our great group of speakers today. If you do want to ask the presenters a question, please use the Q&A function. You can find that on the bottom right hand of your screen. The chat function can be used to ask the Housing Alliance staff logistical questions about the webinar. We will email you a recording of this presentation and any materials that were shared in approximately a week's time. I also want to quickly talk about a couple of upcoming webinars that we have. We have a home repair policy update next week on Wednesday. We will also have a webinar on the Governor's Housing Action Plan coming up in a few weeks. You can find all the events that we do on our website under the events page, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen. It will take you to that page as well. Lastly, I want to thank all our speakers for being part of today's webinar and for sharing their knowledge and expertise with their audience today. Please make sure to leave questions for all of them. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Phyllis, who is the Executive Director of the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, to get us started.
Hi, everyone. We're really excited to have Senator Coleman here today to talk about legislation that he is working on that represents a major challenge for the folks that we work with across the Commonwealth. When I think about the challenges that we all face and what I hear from people who are working on the front lines to create housing, I think that the lack of consistent standards for zoning across the Commonwealth is probably the issue that we at the Housing Alliance hear the most about. There are 2,555 municipalities in Pennsylvania, all who make their own decisions around zoning. And it just leads to delays, frustrations, it stops projects. And so what we're here to talk about today is legislation that would create a standard so that projects can move forward as long as they align with a certain framework. So I'm going to pass it to Aaron Zappia, who, as most of you know, used to be our Director of Government Affairs here at the Housing Alliance. He is now an associate with Nyquist, and he is our legislative consultant, and then he will introduce the senator.
Hey, everybody. I'm Aaron Zappia with Nyquist and Associates. Zoning reform, land use reform is a big topic of conversation in the State House right now. A broader picture is just regulatory reform across the board. We're a state that desperately needs more investment. To get that investment, we need to move regulatory barriers, red tape. And we need the housing, right? We desperately need housing of every kind. We need workforce housing, we need affordable housing, and we need market rate housing. So, folks have been coming at this problem from a variety of different angles, and we're starting to see some proposals come up and some promises of legislation that would open up zoning and open up our land use regulatory structure to build more housing. So State Senator Jarrett Coleman from the Lehigh Valley, the 16th senatorial district, which is an interesting place because, Senator, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're spanning both urban, suburban, and fairly rural Pennsylvania in, a fairly high growth, I think is what we would call the Lehigh Valley, maybe in comparison with the rest of the state. But the housing challenge in your district is certainly a real thing. So this is a very interesting idea to address getting multifamily housing, to get all kinds of housing into areas that have been zoned as commercial and industrial. So, Senator, thank you very much, for working on this with us and for being here today. So, I'd like to turn it over to you, to talk to us a bit about this proposal, what it could mean, what it could do for not just locally, but all of Pennsylvania.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Senator Jarrett Coleman. Thank you, Mr. Zappia, for the introduction, and everyone else on the call. As legislators, we're keenly aware that the housing situation, is real, and the shortage is real, and all of this, is very real as well. So the supply and demand equation, lots of demand, very little supply. So we not only do we need housing, but we need housing on all types of housing, all form of housing. And the district that I represent in Lehigh and Bucks County really is pretty much as diverse as the state. I have portions of the city of Allentown, and then much more rural and suburban areas as well. And the demand for housing stretches across all of those different topography of the district. And what's interesting in some of my travels across the country, as an airline pilot, I've been able to see a lot of other cities and other states that maybe are a little more advanced, or they're further along in housing and have a lot more under control. And what we've seen in some of these other states are maybe some industrial centers, for example, where housing is right in that very area. And so it allows the workers to live very close to work, and ultimately creates more housing. So we've been trying to get a solution. We finally were able to get a co-sponsorship out, and we were able to get some draft language together that basically addresses this side of it, but by allowing the residential development to face less hurdles, specifically in like the industrial space, industrial zone. So again, we know there's an affordability crisis, and the rising housing costs. The costs are fueled not only by the outdated zoning restrictions that limit construction options, and it also adds, as Mr. Zappia was saying, layers of red tape. So to help spur the construction of new housing, we introduced this legislation amending the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Code to remove unnecessary barriers that drive up housing costs and restrict development. The legislation takes targeted approach to streamline local development approvals and empower municipalities to support housing growth without sacrificing safety or quality. So some of the provisions of the bill will include automatic approval for certain developments if a project has secured the water and sewer service and is a non-residential zone or designated for office, retail, or parking. Municipalities must approve the applications. Flexibility for multifamily, mixed use, and adaptive reuse projects. These developments will no longer be subject to rigid requirements, such as, we've heard from a lot of folks in the space, so the minimum, maximum residential density limits, height restrictions that prevented adding affordable units. We've heard of setback issues, lot sizes, and coverage mandates, mandatory wall fences, impervious pavement beyond health and safety needs. We've also heard concerns about the non-public open space requirements or common area requirements that aren't for public space. And of course, the parking mandates, the one-size-fits-all parking mandates that, allowing shared parking agreements instead with this proposal. So hopefully by cutting through unnecessary regulations, we can lower the costs associated with building. We can accelerate development for housing, and timelines will be accelerated as well, expanding the housing supply, especially in areas where demand is the highest. This bill promotes adaptive reuse of existing structures, mixed-use communities, and multifamily housing, all of which are critical to meeting Pennsylvania's housing needs. It's really about common sense. It removes outdated zoning hurdles, gives developers more options, and helps municipalities create faster, vibrant, more affordable communities. And hoping that it's going to be a reasonable thing to get done. We're the ones that can kind of fix this and help, and so these are all proposals to help do this. And this is my proposal after meeting with some stakeholders.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Senator. So I think, kind of an important point that you touched on is proximity to employment, proximity to jobs. So it seems like we're looking at something, because we're talking about industrial space, commercial space that may or may not be currently in use, or maybe it's underutilized. If we're talking about locating housing there, it's conceivable that a lot of these areas are naturally going to be very close to other current industry, or maybe they'll look a little more attractive to potential investment.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen locally, I think it's no secret that constituents across Pennsylvania, industrial sectors, they're not always viewed as most positively by constituents, right? Folks they don't like to hear the terms warehouses. They don't like to talk about data centers and other commercially zoned industrial zone areas. And what we're seeing in some cases are these properties, we've had one locally where the underlying tenant moves out, and then the owner of the property is sitting with an empty industrial property, for example, and they want to do something with it. So this would actually allow another developer to potentially buy that and develop it into housing. And a lot of these areas, like the industrial areas in this district, where almost a large portion of the Lehigh Valley's GDP comes from the production and manufacturing in some of these areas. Yeah, the housing would be proximal to other employment as well, and lots of manufacturers, lots of industrial facilities. So in other states, what we'll see, for example, is what I've seen is you'll be in a section of like an industrial park or something similar to it, and inside of that we'll have apartment complexes.
Interestingly, though, in the House, there's Abby Major and Joe Hogan, a Democrat, two Republicans, that would provide some funding for development, multifamily development that would be located close to jobs. So maybe this is something that could work in conjunction with a proposal like that, or others that are in the pipeline.
Sure. Yeah. Again, we're just trying to, it's just another option, another way to try to solve the problem, to get more housing, available. We don't allow it to happen on farmland, so we do kind of keep the agriculture for agriculture. So this is specific for the other, the other zoning areas. So that's awesome.
Great. And we probably sort of covered this in our conversation, but I think because we have folks from across Pennsylvania who, we would encourage them to be talking to their own legislators about this. If we had to, kind of help folks with messaging, just some points that might resonate the most, broadly. What do we think we could advise folks, and how they approach their legislators on this?
Yeah, well, we need housing, right? So we need more housing. That's like the number one is we need housing. The demand's there. Look at the price of housing. For a younger families, the idea of getting into a $200,000 starter home is just not realistic. I don't know even if that looks, in some places that's not even 500,000. Some places that's way above it. And until you get that first, the American dream of home ownership, for example, and even just finding affordable living, it's everything's getting more expensive. So we can't deny, I think you're in an alternate reality if you say there isn't a housing shortage. So we accept that immediately. We know there's a housing shortage. So what are we going to do to get more supply, and to do that, we have to look at what's causing supply to not be there right now. What we've seen are or costs associated with the supply, right? As some of the developers I've spoke with, in some residential settings, they can spend, costs even on residential, single home residential can be almost 100,000 per home, just regulatory burdens that they have to offset to the consumer, the home buyer. So, I think the first thing is we accept the fact that we know housing is a problem, and we need to address it. So we need to increase the supply, because people they're leaving the state, but not in the numbers to open up the affordability. So we need to increase the supply. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, let's look at the areas that a lot of times folks don't like the industrial areas. I think we have to accept that we've seen folks, a lot of Pennsylvanians don't like data centers. They don't like warehousing, and even industrial, they'll still kind of loop that in mentally as a warehouse. There's no argument on the benefit to the economy. We got to take that out. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of folks are not happy with those warehouse districts, as they would call them. So this allows, as certain businesses may leave, it just frees up that to be used for housing, where we've seen some great apartment complexes, for example, going in, which also can get folks from maybe inner cities. Like in my district, that may allow folks from the inner cities to come out and find housing closer and more affordable to where they're working. And maybe that means that their children can go to a better school district as well, or a higher performing school district, which that helps the family, because then you're getting them access to a better education closer to their job, which puts less strain on the public transit system. Because what I also see in my district is that folks are leaving the centers, the urban centers. They're actually traveling out of them to work. They're going to work in the suburbs, and then they're taking public transit back downtown, where costs are even more expensive. So this would let them live closer to where they work, which means they're spending more time with their families and less time commuting. It's it's just another way to try to solve the problem here. So those are some messaging that I think could be helpful.
I think
of course,
that's
we
great.
take any advice from anyone else that has any advice on messaging. You guys are kind of the professionals here, So
yeah, I mean, we're definitely tying it into to some important issues: transit, education, the economy at large, probably blight as well. While we're not necessarily talking about blighted properties, this could be used to address former industrial sites that could be considered blighted.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in the process right now, we have co-sponsorship memo out. For the folks on the call who may not be aware, we do kind of like to go over just just generally speaking, the process. We're at the starting point, with a co-sponsorship memo out. And Senator, if you could just kind of give folks an idea, what that means, and what might be next, and maybe how soon.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So essentially what we've done is we've told co-sponsorship is essentially a portion of the process where we, in a way, solicit our ideas to other lawmakers and, explain to them what we're considering doing and try to build consensus among other folks through that process. It's hit or miss on a co-sponsorship in terms of, do other people want to sign on that early? Because oftentimes folks will be worried about signing on to something if they don't know what the actual bill looks like, and then their name is attached to something. So that the next step is drafting the actual draft of the legislation, which we have done already. We've been doing that because oftentimes a co-sponsorship is just like a press release, and a lot of people put co-sponsorships out about a lot of things without actually doing the work of drafting the underlying bill. My team has drafted the bill. We kind of wanted to make sure that was fairly far along as well, so that we weren't just sitting with a co-sponsorship without any underlying bill. So we do have a draft in the works. So we're getting really close to being able to release that. And then once there's a draft, we'll be able to share language with the Housing Alliance, where your members, everyone can see the draft, and then you might get more specific questions or suggestions. Like, this isn't just a here's our idea and either take it or leave it. That's not how it goes. It's really supposed to be, and I could care less if the members think there's a better way to do this or you have other suggestions, then please, I could care less if it stays the language it is now or it needs to be changed. The idea is to make a positive change here in the housing arena and to build more houses that people can afford. So however we need to do that. So that's where I kind of look, we'll share that language with you guys. If you as an organization decide, hey, we want to try to make some changes or, we want to look for this in the bill, I'm open to those suggestions. At the end of the day, it's something we have to address and hopefully we can do that. So once the language is released, which hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we can get you guys copies of the actual drafted bill, then you guys can kind of circulate that amongst each other, have more discussions. Then it'll probably be introduced. I don't know if we go to urban affairs and housing or if we go to local government. It would be basically once the bill is introduced, the draft is submitted, it gets attached electronically to the co-sponsorship memo, and then it's introduced as a bill. It will be given a bill number, and at that point, the presiding officer of the Senate will refer the bill to a committee, and when it gets to that committee, then we'll have to, that's also helpful point for folks to try to reach out to the committee chairwoman or chairman to ask them to advance the bill, which we'll try to do as well. So, but at no point does it get to a process where we're not looking for input. The idea is to get something done. So on the housing issue. So anyone that has ideas, we welcome you. Some of the best legislation that we've passed has not actually been my own idea, but ideas that people bring to us, which is kind of fun. That's I think a good way that government works. So it's a two-way street.
So thanks for that overview. I'm just going to jump in because we do have a couple questions. And this question, since we're still working on the draft, you might not have the answer to this, but someone is asking if municipalities would be required to update their existing zoning ordinances to match the provisions of this bill. I don't know if that's been decided.
I don't think they would need to.
Okay.
But can you also take all these questions and we'll reference it with
Sure.
and then get actual answers back to these folks as well. But I don't think they'd have to change their underlying.
Okay. And then there's another question that you already answered, which is which committee would this be referred to? And it's not clear if it would be local government or urban affairs and housing. Did they change the name of the Senate committee? I know they changed it in the House.
They haven't changed the name of the Senate committee.
Okay.
So yeah, I think one of those two. So
okay.
And the urban affairs and housing, both are great chairs and bias, but they're both great. And I think they both understand that housing is a challenge. So, yeah.
Right. And then there's another question I'm going to reword it. It's basically what would the legislation do? But the question is, would it remove local barriers or state level barriers? And the answer is local, but I don't know if you want to expand on that or if you think that's enough of an answer.
I think what we're doing is essentially, saying, well, the state is the one that can dictate the MPC, right? So in a way, we're changing it. So the state barrier is that it needs a legislative change to let this happen. So we address that from the state level, but then the local zoning is where we will essentially say, look, this has to be allowed by right if they meet these conditions. The developers meet these. And again, this is residential. That's what we're talking about, residential for housing. If they meet these conditions in these underlying zoning zoned areas, they'll have to.
And then the next question, I also believe you already answered, but will it amend the MPC, Municipal Planning Code?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then I want to say something about advocacy with your colleagues, but is there anything you want to say about advocacy? Aaron already asked you about messaging, but any thoughts about how we can be helpful? And then I'll follow that up asking.
I would love to know what folks think. We'll get the draft to everyone, and if they can let us know how they what your thoughts are, any common sense changes that you think would be good. Your members are the ones that are involved in building and making sure that there's more housing. So, and no one knows everything. So being able to ask someone, hey, what do you guys think? As an airline pilot, I've done that. Sometimes there's a situation in the airplane, you don't know exactly, a maintenance issue. You're sitting on the ground, and you need to call someone to make sure that you know what you're doing here. And you don't just guess. And it's the same thing. Why guess when we have access to so many folks that are doing this all the time? So yeah, it would be really helpful to get opinions from everyone to understand that, and then as it progresses, calling their local elected officials as well, and to try to try to move it forward. So
Great. So for everyone, we always need help. The senator also needs help in reaching colleagues, because connecting state policy with what is happening locally is always such an important part of securing support and helping a bill move forward. The Housing Alliance, working with 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Housing Choices Coalition, I think it was last summer, organized a set of in-district meetings with legislators. And we found we love for people to come to Harrisburg, but it isn't always necessary. And so we're planning to organize that type of advocacy week again, where we can work with you around your schedule and, of course, the legislator's schedule to do in-district meetings specifically about this issue. If you know that you're interested, you can email Jen. Her email is jennifer@housingalliancepa.org, and we can we'll set a week, but really we can kind of work around your schedule, and then we will circulate the draft and bring back to the senator any suggestions that folks have. I just want to say again, Senator Coleman, really appreciate you taking on this issue. I don't know if I need to belabor the point of how challenging the local zoning, really lack of clarity and consistency is. I also just want to add that in our messaging, we want to really be thoughtful about how we talk about local control, and that no one is attempting to take away local control. It's really setting up a framework that creates some consistency and some standards, so that it's not so much of a mystery whether or not your project will be approved, because it not only delays the project, it also often stops the project, or developers might not even be proposing projects in the first place. So, is there anything, Aaron or Senator Coleman, that you want to say in closing?
no, I think uniformity is important, right? Uniformity and expectations are important when people are building or developing or working with the government, right? And so what I've even heard from developers, that they prefer not to build houses in a certain county, because they just know that the local municipalities there, or in a certain municipality, because they know they're hard to work, and they know that they can make, why go there when they haven't, I guess what's frustrating is there's a lot of developers that are doing really great projects, especially in the residential. And what I'm seeing is that they'll pick and choose counties that are easier to work with, or local municipalities that are easier to work with sometimes, even though they know there's need in the other areas, way more. Mm-hmm. But it just doesn't financially make sense for them, because they're going to spend way more money that they're going to have to offset to the consumer, either at the end of the day in higher rent or in a higher purchase price of a condo or a house. And so to me, that just, when you see that and you're talking, yeah, we could develop there, but why would we do that? They're 15 times harder to work with. And even within the same county, just certain municipalities. And who loses in that case? I think the constituents that need the housing are losing, because the developers are going where it's easiest, and what makes sense for their business. And it's understandable, but we have a chance to kind of level the playing field here, so that everyone's operating under the same expectations, the same rules, and that just should help the whole situation.
Right, absolutely.
Well said.
Yeah. So I already mentioned that the Housing Alliance has been working with 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania. I also want to mention that there is a set of other bills that have been introduced or are about to be introduced in the Senate and the House. I will note, I think a question I missed was, I think someone was asking about like one bill that kind of addresses the whole issue, which is not the approach we're taking, for a variety of reasons. It tends to be easier to get people to wrap their heads around an issue if you deal, even though it's all under the same umbrella. It's a little easier if we deal with one issue at a time. I know people don't love that, but that's just kind of how the legislative process works. But there is a set of other bills in the House and the Senate. And again, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Senator Coleman. We're going to do everything we can to help you move forward this legislation. So really appreciate you doing this and you being here.
And yeah, absolutely. And I saw another question about will we share the legislation? Yeah, as soon as we get the draft, we'll share it around. Maybe we do another webinar just to kind of go over. People, maybe your members will have a lot more chance to review it and have some other input. But then at some point we need to get on the same team and say, okay, here we go. Let's take this and try to move it through, because we don't wait forever. We want to get as close as we can to good product and then move it through. But I
Absolutely.
appreciate your time today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.